introduce. She doesn't need any introduction, but we'll do it anyway. This is one of the greatest writers that this continent has produced, and I'm hoping that after you've had the pleasure of her company and her words and ideas this evening, that you will all seek out her works if you have not already read them, and introduce her works to all that you come across. And we hope that also in that way we will get a lot more books out of her in future. So very quickly, the biography, literary biography, short biography of Tsitsi Dangarembga. Tsitsi Dangarembga is a poet, activist, novelist, playwright. Her debut novel, Nervous Conditions, was hailed by Doris Lessing as one of the most important novels of the 20th century. It is on the list of Africa's 100 best books of the last century, and also BBC's list of 100 stories that changed the world. The book won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Africa in 1989. It was published in 1988. It has been followed by 2 sequels, one of which we will be examining more closely this evening. 2 sequels, the Book of Not, which was published in 2006, and the latest, This Moldable Body, published last year. And she'll be reading a bit from it for us this evening. Tsitsi Dangarembga is also a filmmaker and is renowned for writing the script for Molara, a film about the plight of widows in her native Zimbabwe. She is the founder and director of the Institute of Creative Arts for Progress in Africa. She's also among the most significant figures changing the film landscape in Africa, having founded the International Images Film Festival for Women in 2002 in Harare. But tonight, she's in Lagos with us. Welcome, Tsitsi Dangarembga. What's it like being here with us in Lagos?
What's it like to be here with you all in Lagos? It is absolutely fantastic. Words fail me, and I'm looking here at the most amazing woman, Lola, and I'm thinking, how did she do this? How did she create such a vibrant space where people feel so at home, where the creative juices flow, where people feel so safe, where, dare I say this, yes I can, where African men and women creators actually get on. So this is really nothing short of a miracle, and I am so grateful. I am so grateful, not just the African men and women getting on, but I am so grateful. I feel completely blessed and completely honored to have been asked to be part of this amazing festival.
Thank you so much. We talked about Lola making this kind of vibrant space, but it's also the kind of space that you have tried to create elsewhere. 2002, a film festival for women in Harare. Why was that necessary, and what has that journey been like?
Really, I think one of the reasons why I created the International Images Film Festival for Women, IIFM, was that I didn't want to tread on anyone's toes. There were men making films in Zimbabwe, and there were men doing festivals in Zimbabwe, and I thought, well, I need to do something in film as well, so the open niche was for women. And of course, that narrative has really been something that I've been pushing. And can you imagine, if you cannot hear the voice of a woman when the woman herself is not present because it's in a normal, what about the voice of a woman when it's actually a picture on a big screen, like 10 feet tall? There's going to be even more resistance to those kinds of stories. So it looks like this space will be occupied.
An extension of what you already were trying to do in your fiction, obviously, because by that time, of course, nervous conditions had become, a classic, really.
Yes, absolutely. It was something that I had wanted to do in my fiction. And what happened with nervous conditions is that when I finished writing it, which was around 1984, 1985, I couldn't find a publisher in Zimbabwe, so it wasn't published for about 4 years afterwards. And I had actually decided to go to film school by the time it was published. And so I went to film school and I didn't do much writing while I was learning how to make films. And then in that time, all these wonderful...
Decided to go to film school. I started writing. Of course, we had wonderful Ama Ataidu and people beforehand, but this whole new harvest of young women writing so fearlessly and really delving into the issues that they felt were so important to them suddenly happened while I was at film school. However, when I looked at the screen, I didn't see that kind of flourishing of African women's narratives as well. So it was quite easy for me to think, okay, I will engage in that area as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not going to ask too many questions because I think we have a lot of your fans here this evening, and the idea is that they should be able to engage with you as much as possible. So the questions will be few and far between on this end. But I'm sure that people are dying to hear you read from this mournable body. So if perhaps you would like to. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity, Molara.
I decided to read a bit from this mournable body, which really does engage with that very issue. This mournable body is the third and last book in the Tambuzai trilogy, and it's basically the story of a young woman who grows up in rural Rhodesia and the title, her life story in becoming an adult woman in contemporary Zimbabwe. So she's lost her job, she's gone through all sorts of terrible things, and she has been, she had a nervous breakdown, she was in a hospital, and her mother did not come to visit her while she was in the hospital. So mothers and daughters is another of the themes that I'm very engaged with at the moment. What the mother does is she sends up this sack of meaning with a relative. And Tambuzai decides she is not going to put that seed to this baby. But when she comes out of hospital, she doesn't have anywhere to go, so she goes from place to place. And this easy meal is following her. One of the places she goes to is her cousin Nyasha's house. Then she gets another job and leaves for her own house. So now she's in her own house in this new job which isn't working out very well. She had left the baby meal in her cousin Yasha's house, and her cousin thinks she forgot it, so she brings it. So now the bag of baby meal is sitting in her kitchen. Silently you curse yourself for not having hidden the bag well enough. And when you have done with yourself, you swear at your cousin. You refuse the dinner that Ma Tabitha the help offers, and pace from living room to bedroom, unable to separate. When she finally leaves, you stand by the kitchen table, staring at When she finally leaves, you stand by the kitchen table, staring at the small sack of meal, which is by now covered in weevil webs and emits a strong your mother's love while at Maimanyanga's and taken it into your body. In this way, you would have made a home wherever you were. At these thoughts, anger overcomes you. You drag the sack off the table and push it into the dustbin. You fetch a bottle of wine from the pantry, switch on the TV, and force yourself to be engrossed in an Australian soap that is showing on the satellite channel. You fill the long advertisement pauses with lengthy drafts from your glass and are quite surprised to find a few hours later that you have drunk all 3 of the bottles you had stored. Daily you smile, for the horror that lurks at the back of your mind has dissolved into a blur of dim purple fur. The TV drones,
your head whooshes. You doze off without realizing it. You wake, frantically brushing away a column of ants that troops over your stomach. You open your eyes. They march on. You close your eyes. The insects continue parading. Staring at them, the thing you promised yourself you will never recall pops back into memory. She is a corpse, long dead, lying by a bus shelter, dined on by creeping things, gnawed at by scavengers, yourself as you lay drunk on the road. You rush away from her into the kitchen. Once and for all, you must bury this woman. You rip the lid from the rubbish bin and heave up the bag of mealie meal. You scatter its contents across the floor and over the furniture, while rage flays at you like a whip. You scoop the mealie meal up again and run out into the garden. There you drag the hoe from the garage. You dig a hole deep as a grave and pour in the gift from your mother. Dogs bark far away. To your ears, they are drawing closer as to hunted quarry. Unnerved, you lumber to your room, pulling off your blouse as you stumble. You want your head concealed beneath the bed covers, your body on the mattress curled into a ball like a fetus. Stretching forward to search for pajamas, you sway back from the bed, stricken. You switch off the light, you flick it on again. This makes no difference. Growing, as does your horror, a head lies on your pillow. You plunge the room into darkness once more, then flood it with light again. Features and proportions change as the head mutates into a small, misshapen person. The legs convulse and shatter into an army of students in the green and beige of Northley uniform where you were once a teacher. Rushing forward with a scream, you grip one between finger and thumb to throw her away. Her teeth fasten on the flesh of your thumb. You realize it is your mother. You shake your hand. She holds on. Banging your wrist against its rim, you succeed finally in throwing her into the waste paper bin by the door. A wound, she sobs, one just like mine. You want to drown me in it. The basket is of woven sisal. Your mother grabs at the threads, struggling yet unable to haul herself out. You surge back across the room, grasping for the next diminutive apparition that has also metamorphosed into your mother. A womb, oh no, how can it be? How can a womb tell me what is what? Baba Wangwe, oh my father, you elders, how can it happen? Your mother screams as you dispose of the next one beside her. Both of them strive to climb out, tearing and groping at each other, until they lose hold and slither back down. You spend the rest of the night picking up the creatures in uniform who are your mother and interring them in the wastepaper bin, lobbing them in and pulling your dressing gown over the top to prevent their escape while you trap the remainder. When you wake, you are in bed. Your dressing gown still covers the bin. You pick up your slippers as you had grasped a stone at the market more than 2 years ago, with the intention of hurling them, this time at your wastepaper bin. But you do not throw as you become aware that someone is howling. A scream wails about the room, making the window panes shudder. You clamp your teeth. The cry continues. It is the howl you had wished that schoolgirl Elizabeth to utter. It was meant to be her, so that you would not have to scream it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One of the things that stands out immediately one goes into this novel is the use of the second person. And I was wondering, and it has that effect of almost making me feel like this is happening to me sometimes. What was the reason why you chose, because we're quite used to seeing this in some short stories, but it's not very common in the novel. Why did you choose the second person as the narrative style here?
Molara, I struggled a bit with getting the voice that I wanted, the emotional pitch that I wanted. The first two books, Nervous Conditions and the Book of Not, are written in the first person. And so I started writing this in the first person as well. But there was just no distance. And I felt that readers reading this kind of thing in the first person would also feel a bit suffocated. And it wasn't really working for me. And so then I just thought to myself, well, this is a story I want to tell. And when you tell a story about something that happened to you, but you don't actually want to say I, you say you. This is what we do in real life. So I thought, let me try this technique and see if it works for the novel. So I started it and I found it worked perfectly and I was happy with the outcome.
Thank you. Reading parts of it, it's been a very, very long time since I read Aikwe Ama, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, but this just gave that sort of vibe as you're reading, the dwelling on passages of cruelty, lack of tenderness, self-hate, at times, abuse, violence, and things like that, and how that makes you, as the reader, recoil, even as you're getting into this story more and more, and you want to see what's going to happen with Tambu. Why the delving so deeply into, honestly, of the headliners we've had so far, no title has come close to the theme as much as this, and it gets really, really heavy as you get into the novel also. Why this searing look into abuse, violence, and topics like that, which, if you can just shed some light on that. Thank you.
That's such a huge topic, so I think I'll begin from the present. Today, the 25th of October, something happened in Harare Is anyone aware of the event that happened in Harare today? Anybody? Okay, there was a march, and it was a march against sanctions that are applied to Zimbabwe by the United States government. This march was organized by the Zimbabwean government to the tune of $4 million. This $4 million was spent in part to bring in people from the rural areas. You know, I don't go back to my traditional home very often anymore because it is just so depressing. It is so painful. One of the last times I went back, it was 11 o'clock. People were so happy to see me. They were running up to say hello. And I would say 90% of the men were already drunk at 11 o'clock in the morning. I can remember going back to the actual homestead, and it was just devastating. And these are the people who are being bussed for $4 million to march against sanctions, where some of the demands for the removal of sanctions that have been set by the United States are political reforms, respect for human rights. You see now, what a deep kind of violence is that? I remember one of the men who was inebriated at that time in the morning came up and told me that he had been a school teacher, and we had the whole conversation in English. And he told me he was writing a book, and would I help him, would I read the manuscript when it was done. So now these people are not even enabled to do anything, and they are kept in this kind of conditions so that when the government produces a spectacle, come to Harare, my home is about 3-4 hours away from Harare. You know, people have no other option but to do it because it's something happening. Just a minute. What happens to them when they get there? Okay, they march in the streets, they are given t-shirts, they all have the same t-shirt and these caps, so that they look like a regiment. And then they are given lunch, and they are given chicken in, or something like that, and Pepsi Cola. Now, isn't Pepsi Cola an American company? So this is the taxpayers' money that is being used ostensibly to march against neo-imperialism and globalization, but using the taxpayers' money to actually fund the companies of that very country. Now, this is the kind of violence that I was engaging with. And I was thinking, you know, how does this kind of violence come to be? What has happened inside people for them to be able to coexist with such a system of violence? I'll tell you another example. 2008, in the first very highly contested elections in Zimbabwe, that was a time when the kind of tactics that had been used in the rural areas, where there were all these all-night meetings with singing and dancing and denouncing of people, were actually brought into the urban areas and the peri-urban areas. And that was a time also when there were unspeakable kinds of violence. I don't even want to go into them. And so I have been at pains to find out what kind of degeneration occurs in the soul and the being of a person that enables a person to be part of such a system. And I think I found some explanations with Tambudzai, this kind of extreme alienation from yourself, where you're told that, you know, these are the kinds of successes that you should be having. You know, you should be having this huge car, you should be wearing designer clothes, you should be having this huge house. And of course, you know, that can't be for everybody, but you're made to feel a failure. And if you've invested all your life, like most of us did, you know, coming from that generation, you get your education, you get your profession, and you're meant to live that life. You know, you see yourself as a failure, and you don't know where to go next, and your rage. just starts emanating against everything. So those were the kinds of issues that I was engaging with, the kind of extreme violence that you can trace from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top.
Thank you very much. I wasn't going to stop you. I was going to say that if people are bussed into Harare to come and march against their own interests, that is a kind of self-harm, basically.
Yes, it is a kind of self-harm, but people don't always understand what their interests are. Zimbabwe is still 60 to 70% rural, and we have retained the system of rural chiefs. Now, when the colonials came at the end of, in the 19th century, there were chiefs and kings in their areas, but of course the colonial government replaced them with people who were amenable to their interests. And so this has continued. And so now the people who are in these areas do not necessarily represent the interests of the people. But because the system is the same, the people regard the chiefs as representing their interests. So when a chief, for example, gets a four-wheel drive car from the government and is told, now please deliver your people, of course, the chief will go and deliver the people. And they still have jurisdiction over the land because there is no land tenure in the rural areas. And one of the functions of the chiefs was to apportion land. So people are literally scared that if we don't do what we're told, we may end up with nowhere to live. And, how valid that fear is or not is not really the question. The issue is that the people have the fear, and that this kind of fear is instrumentalized in this way.
Thank you. I'd better keep my promise. Let's open to the audience. I hope we have a roving mic to go round. So if people want to ask questions or make very quick comments, please, questions in the main. 1 minute for your question, please. Please rise up because it looks nice on the live stream. People can see your faces. Tell us who you are and ask your question to the headliner, Tsitsi Dangarembga, in a minute. So if hands can go up, please, the mic will come to you. Do we have a mic on standby? Yes, we do. Any audience? Comments? Okay, yes, we have a commenter, a question in the front here. Oh, I thought you raised your hand. Okay. So, you mentioned alienation earlier, and Tambo is quite alienated from herself, from human feeling. There's the scene where her hostel mate has come a cropper, about to get on the bus, and I'm reading and I'm there wincing. I just cannot understand why she would totally not feel any empathy for this person. There's the bit where she's going on the bus and she's stepped on this child. She's not sorry, she's not... What is happening there?
Yeah, what is happening there, and I will engage with respect to the bus scene. What has happened in that scene is that Tambuzai is in this hostel and sees herself as a failure because she's approaching middle age and she's still living in a young women's hostel. And so there are all these lovely young women around her. So she's at the bus stop, a combi stop, and one of the young women comes to get into a combi, and she's wearing a mini skirt. Now there is a kind of violence against women in Zimbabwe. I don't know if you have it here,
We do have it, yes.
Yeah.
So the misogyny is actually coming through here also.
Exactly. So the hostel mate has this mini skirt on and she's looking fabulous. She's got these high heels on, but when she tries to climb up into the combi, she has to hold on to her skirt. The people see it, especially beginning with the men, and they start taunting her and they pull her out of the minibus. And it looks as though she is going to be beaten up, which actually happens. It sometimes happens in Zimbabwe. And the women join in, and so this is the issue about patriarchal women and how we internalize that power dynamic and also begin to oppress other women along gender dimensions. To add on to that, we've just had a situation in Zimbabwe where we have a gender commission, and there is a lot of a gender commission, yeah, and there is escalating violence against women in tertiary institutions. So the gender commission was seized with this issue, and so the remedy that they advised was that there should be a dress code. So that
we have a Lagos audience here, and I'm really waiting for your questions. Once the headliner has finished her line of thought, it's triggering in the audience as you're speaking. So please do go on.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, but this is the way in which women internalize patriarchal values, hoping to get ahead. And we have seen so much of it, and also in politics in Zimbabwe, that although I'm talking about Tambudai, who is certainly not a politician, I really wanted to engage with that issue.
The Nigerian society is actually in serious contestation about this at the moment, and now we have a hand. I knew it. So please, can the mic come to the front? Okay. The gentleman in the painted mask.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Tsitsi. My name is Franklin. So I have two questions. So the first question, you mentioned the power dynamic. And earlier today, when Reni's panel, when they were talking about skin, so the info was talking about how his people treated him as well. He had albinism. And so at some point I was telling somebody, is it that, so I'm often worried once the power dynamic changes. So you see someone who has been oppressed all their life, hand out the same oppression to someone else, wielding the same tools you have tried to dismantle. So you see a black man chant about racism and white supremacy and turn around and say, well, I don't really understand gays, right? So you see a woman, oh, I'm a feminist, I'm a white woman, I'm a feminist, yay, but black women, just hold on a bit. And it often confuses me. So I was asking is it that, okay, this same thing that we chant about white supremacy, we also do it? Because some people were literally talking about how he couldn't find any place. So white people will let him know, yeah, you have albinism, but you're not white. Then black people in South Africa will tell him, you are not black as well. So can we agree that, is it that we are all the problem? That humanity is the problem? That's the first question. Second question, sorry.
Your 1 minute. Okay, very quickly.
Very quickly. Question. So when we talk about Africa as a country, it's something a lot of us rebel against. What you just described now is a Nigerian political rally. People are bussed from the rural areas giving money to come and campaign. So when you talked about, again, someone getting on the bus with a short skirt, something that you see in Lagos all the time. So and we always push back against, Africa is a country, it's not, but there's so many similarities in our experiences. So could you comment on that?
Yes, I can comment. I hope I'll do so intelligently. It's such a huge issue. It's something, of course, that I've also been seized with a lot. And I go back to the liberation struggle, for example, where the values of a new system, a different way of doing things, building the nation, etc., were touted, and these were the values that enabled the liberation movement to gain traction amongst the people. And so I say what happened. And there are two trains of thought that I have. First of all, I think that when you are enduring the trauma of being marginalized because of your skin color in a colonial setting, lots of things are happening to you. This is the gray matter. You know, things are happening in your mind. And what I know is that, at least in my part of the world, people didn't talk about it. It was, don't talk about it, just get on with what you have to do. And so we know that those things that are very traumatizing that we don't talk about, they take on an energy of their own. So I think this is something that people hadn't thought about. Then there's another aspect to it that I think during the liberation struggle in Zimbabwe, there was a lot of return to ATR, African traditional religion, and this was used to mobilize the people. But because ATR had not been practiced formally for a very long time, it wasn't the norm anymore. The forms that it took during the liberation struggle were probably not really the forms of a positive religion. I mean, anything could happen. Anybody could get up and say, oh, I have such and such a spirit, and this spirit tells me to do this. And there was no way of finding out how valid those claims were. So I think there is that level at which people spiritually allow themselves to do certain things in the name of something. But I don't believe that they had really engaged with themselves concerning their commitment, because the prize was just so big. It was such an obvious thing to say, oh, I'm going to fight for the country, when you might have had another motive. And so none of these things were taken into account. You know, it was guerrilla warfare, and the tactics were terror. And so people were not thinking of those kinds of finesses. And then after the war, we didn't have a period of real reconciliation. It was simply announced on television that now we are going to be reconciled.
So no truth and reconciliation.
We didn't have a period of that nature. You know, war crimes were simply forgiven. No one was put in jail. Nothing was investigated. And what it looks like is that actually there wasn't a demobilization, because the situation is that the Zimbabwean government took over from the Rhodesian government, which was in war mode. So all the structures that they took over were war structures. And these then became national structures. So we had a guerrilla military complex from the very beginning, compounded with spiritual complexes, and it was really a very a matrix of issues there, which we didn't engage with. And so out of that, I really don't think that we could be looking at the real motives of people. The motives are now becoming apparent with time. And as these motives become apparent, then people begin to question more and more. For me, it's not so much a question of blame that people have those motives, because most of us have them. We want to do well. You know, it's just how much are we prepared to do? Now think, if you had been in a situation where you were encouraged to go to war, to live in the most brutal situations. You know, some of the war literature will tell you that people had 8 grains of maize a day to eat. 8 grains of maize. And you go through all that, and you have engaged in your guerrilla terror tactics, and people have said, well done, that was wonderful. Here, the country, we're coming with aid. You know, here's money, we're going to build you hospitals, you're so wonderful, we're going to give you honorary degrees. I mean, isn't that encouraging bad behavior? And we have hindsight now to be able to analyze all that. So for me, where I think that the behavior should have really been different is some kind of self-analysis as one saw that, oh, what I am doing is not really having a positive impact for the wider community. And, you know, things could still have changed if people had been willing to say, okay, I'm behaving like this, but it's having a negative impact, so what do I need to change about myself? And this is what we are failing to do. And I think it's now just become a personality trait. And possibly people are too far steeped in that kind of behavior to change. So yes, it is a human problem from that point of view. And this is why what I say is that we have a crisis of personhood on the continent, which has so many causes, you know, from the flow of our history being interrupted, which was the flow of our development at a national level. We know that if you interrupt the flow of development of a child, you're going to have problems later on, and the child is going to have to work very hard as it develops into adulthood to overcome. So I think we are in that crisis at the personal level, at the community level, at the national level, at the regional level, because all of SADC was backing this march against sanctions. Even South Africa, which is suffering from Zimbabwean refugees. Anyway, so at the regional level and at the continental level and at the racial level with the diaspora as well. That's what I think. It is a crisis of personhood. And so this is why these kinds of spaces need to be supported and celebrated, because these are the spaces where we begin to reclaim a personhood that is appropriate and positive for the 21st century in which we find ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Can the mic go to the third row? Yes.
Thank you so much.
After which we'll go to Kina.
Okay.
1 minute, please.
Okay. So this is a comment about, a question about, I guess, what, are we calling it a trilogy?
Your name, please?
My name is Comfort. So I remember reading Never's Conditions and just thinking about like all the different kind of anxieties that are captured in that story, but also sort of like noting the strain of what I would call optimism that was still present there, and then like the Book of Nut coming along, and it's a little bit less optimistic with her little sister becoming a child soldier and all of that stuff. And then the Mournable Body is just sounds super bleak. And I just I was just wondering about that decision on your part. Like, is that just a testament to how difficult it is to capture, to escape any kind of pessimism, or to capture even just a smidge of hope somewhere? Because that seemed to be lacking a bit, and at this point, like it incrementally got less hopeful as it went along. So that was what I wanted to ask about.
Yeah, the Book of Knots really looked at racial issues, and so through the microcosm of Tambudzai at a predominantly white private school in Rhodesia at that time, I engaged with the issue of what does it mean to be colonized. Tambudzai had experience of the poverty that comes with colonization, but she hadn't had the metaphysical experience of colonization that Yasha had had, and so she now has it when she goes to this school. And that was really important for me, because, you know, we are told, you know, slavery happened half a millennium ago, get over it. Apartheid happened, when did it happen? When did it stop happening? Yeah, exactly. You know, get over it. We're told, yeah, Zimbabwe got independence in 1980. Get over it. But I've already mentioned the structures, like with the chiefs, that were put in place. And so we are still living the effects of those structures, and they're still residual. And so, you know, I don't want to be told to get over it. You know, it's like there are some mothers, a child falls down, one mother will pick the child up and comfort the child, the other mother will say, why are you crying? Get over it. You know, so we need this period of mourning and looking back and grieving and finding out what part is hurting and attending to that part and making sure that it gets well, and then thinking, oh, you know, so I'm better now. And then you realize, actually, no, that was my knee, but now it's my heart that's hurting. You know, we need to be given that time, otherwise we're never going to recover. So this is what I was doing with the trilogy, and it is hard. And it was meant to be hard. You don't come away from your own island to cart millions of people over an ocean in order for it to be good for them and easy for them. So that is that hardship that we are now working through. So it is going to be hard. And I want to say, it doesn't matter if it's hard. That is what we have to go through, and we will go through it. And Tambudzai comes through. She actually comes through whole. And for me, it's the usual solution. The women have to stick together and keep those hearts in the right place.
I was going to ask you about female solidarity, but you've you've beaten me to it, and we have our answer. Can the microphone go to Kina, please?
Yeah, I won't lie. When you released Book of Not, I was like, yay, she's back. Even though you hadn't really gone away. But what I wanted to ask you was, what did it feel like learning filmmaking while at the same time being the writer of the exceptional nervous conditions and the success it had had? What were you thinking? Did you feel like coming back to writing immediately?
No, Kina, thank you so much for that question. I wasn't actually a successful writer when I went to film school because it hadn't been published. You know, I had tried to get it published in Zimbabwe, as I mentioned, and we had a lot of black publishers at that time. It was shortly after independence in 1980, so they had taken over from the white publishers, but these were young black men, and they just, to be charitable, I will say they could not understand it. You know, and so I had actually given up, and I thought, well, writing isn't my thing. And then I began to read a lot of the African American women writers, and I looked to see where they had published. And many of them, of course, had published in the United States, and I had no experience with the United States. But then Alice Walker's The Color Purple was published by the Women's Press, and that was in London. And now, you know, my colonial experience, I had experience with London, and so I sent it to them, and I didn't hear back from them. Then many years, several years, let's say, after I had sent it to them, I happened to be in London, so I went round to their offices and I asked them if they had received it. And they said, no, we don't think we received something of that nature. And I told them I definitely sent it to you. So the woman said to me, well, if you sent it, it will still be in the basement, so I'll go and check. So she went down to the basement and she came up with this package, which also now had cobwebs like the mealie meal sack. You know, and it was dusty, and she said, is this it? So I said, yes, this is it, you know. And in fact, very often the universe is really very helpful, because the person who was heading the Women's Press at the time was a South African woman who was in exile, a white woman. And so they gave her the book to read that day. The very next day she called me up, and that was it. But I had already started my applications to film school. Then I got to film school, and writing a film script is a completely different exercise to writing literature, to writing prose. And so I decided not to engage with prose for a while and learn how to do that too, which I've now done.
Thank you. You said you finished. Oh, okay, so we have questions. So, sorry to me. Can the microphone come to the second row, please? Yes, thank you. I think we have another hand up. Okay, great. Oh, two. Good. Please go on. Yes.
My name is Aris Okwo, and it's such a pleasure to be acquainted with your work and to see how influenced you are by the concepts of identity, of personal and national and continent-wide identity, and also your identity as a woman. And bringing that now to your work with female filmmakers on the continent, I'm wondering if you have any expectations. What are the things you want to see happen with women in film? Because it's so obvious how much of your personal identity and your expectations of yourself as a woman have influenced your work.
Yes, that's a question that I really am so happy to answer. I want to see women filmmakers on the continent doing what the women writers have done. I want to be able to go anywhere where there is cinema and see these narratives that the woman absolutely wanted to tell in film, so that it's not only in literature. And to try and help that happen, I founded in 2016 the African Women Filmmakers Hub. And we did a few exercises, trainings in Zimbabwe, Kenya, and the big event that we had was a 3-week script writing residency in Senegal. And from there, I'm working with various young women in Kenya and Rwanda, and also here in Lagos, actually, to produce some narratives that really tell the stories of what the women are concerned with at the moment. One of the stories from Nigeria is an adaptation of a book called Trapped in Oblivion. Has anyone heard about that book? It's, by Ifeoma Ezeobi, is that right? Yeah, and so I'm working with 2 young filmmakers here, a writer, Ife Sinachi Okoli Opagu, and Shioma Onyewe is, and we had meetings while I was here. So I'm doing my best. You know, the difference there is that if you really want to write, and even if you don't have a laptop, you can, buy a book for 50 cents and a pen and start writing. Whereas making a film, you actually need somebody to put a couple of 100,000 down, and that is so difficult. No one really wants to see black female bodies being celebrated. And so, it's a bit of a process, but I've also had some meetings with people while I'm here, so I'm hoping that the African Women Filmmakers Hub and the slate of about 6 films that I have, will see the light of day.
Thank you. Well, Ashunai is already signaling, so the 3 questions, we'll take them together, and those will be the last 3. Where's the mic, please? Can the mic go to, okay. Can the gentleman ask his question first? Please, everyone has a minute. No, not that hand. The gentleman right in front of the cameras.
Okay, yeah.
Because only the 3 people identified previously will ask questions, please. Yeah.
Hi.
The mic went to but never mind.
Okay.
Do go on.
Thank you. I want to ask about generational trauma and if there is any kind of responsibility at all on victims of generational trauma, especially when there hasn't been any sort of truth and reconciliation. Is there any responsibility on the victims of such trauma to kind of lift themselves from that suffering? Is there? I'm asking specifically with reference to Nigeria's case because post-Civil War, there has been propaganda, but relating to truth and reconciliation, but there hasn't been really any substance to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Did the gentleman in the row behind want to ask a question? No. Can the mic come forward, please? Is there someone there? No? Okay, can you come, where you are, to your left.
Hi, Tsitsi. Thanks for being here. You look great, by the way, as do you, Molara. My name is Goga Clay. I am a self-published author. I'm also a filmmaker. I'd like to piggyback on the lady's question and see how you manage the two. It seemed like initially there was a little bit of a struggle. And my question is there now a clear bifurcation, or does one influence the other, and is that for better or worse?
And to one other one, please. Oh, I was mistaken. Do we have a third question? Anyway, okay. No? Okay, so we have two. So that's it, audience. Thank you. Because of your explosive performance yesterday, we will give you a reprieve. Can the microphone come to the B, please?
I would love to hear your thoughts on self-recovery and healing, particularly in this moment of global chaos. What can we do? What can I do?
Thank you. Beautiful question.
So generational trauma, that is so important. You know, sometimes we think, well, why do we have to take the responsibility because it was them? But as each of us has the responsibility to be well and to seek to be as well as we can and to recover from hurts and traumas, so do generations. So if it's not being done for you, then you have to take it upon itself to make sure that it is done. Because if you don't do it, you will continue to suffer and you will pass this suffering on. Yesterday it was you, Molara, you mentioned post-traumatic slavery disorder. People are beginning to see how these kinds of traumas can even change the DNA, so that characteristics that are initiated by trauma are inherited. So we absolutely have to take that responsibility. You know, we can moan as much as we like, but the fact is that is what is before us, and it's got to end somewhere. So I think we really need to say, let it end with us. You know, we have those kinds of things in Zimbabwe as well. You might have heard of the massacres of people in the south of the country. You know, so we haven't even had any healing about that. They talk about it, but it hasn't actually been done. So unless we deal with it, we're just going to pass it on. The second was, yes, I bifurcate, and I try to do this on purpose because I feel that film has a very specific way of narrative. And the way I like to write is not really very cinematic. It might feel, my prose might feel cinematic, but that is because of the emotional content. And with film, you're looking for emotional content also, but you arrive at it by a different path. So personally, it works for me to bifurcate. Now, I'll tell you something though, sometimes if I don't have an idea, I will borrow, but that is the exception rather than the rule. And the last question, yes, it's something we have to do, because if we don't heal, we are going to remain unhealed, we're going to remain broken, we're going to remain wounded and traumatized. The question is, how do we do it? And the first thing you do is you talk. Where does it hurt? It hurts here. We need to ask each other, where does it hurt? It hurts here. We need to listen to each other. Oh, it's hurting there. What does it feel like? I have no words to tell you how badly it feels. Well, you know, the other day I fell down and it felt like this. These are the conversations we have to have, and we have to have them in safe places like this. And unless we do that kind of work, we're not going to achieve the kind of generational and other healing that has been mentioned before.
So, do not be silent about your pain. Do not be silent about your pain. In Nigeria, we have this phenomenon where someone has a headache, and the thinking amongst a lot of people these days, I think it's a rhetoric that's come out of some of the churches actually, And you're supposed to say you're well when you're not well. And I keep saying to people, this is trauma, this is, yes. and sometimes I will say to someone on the phone, I'm sorry, it is not well. It is not well, because you have to give expression to how you feel inside, and it's a way forward. Thank you so very much. Toni Morrison was a huge influence on you, wasn't she?
Yes.
Talk a bit about that.
Absolutely. Recently, I tweeted that something was unspeakable. And somebody really went for me and said, that's plagiarism, Toni Morrison. And I was aware when because I just loved the way that she said that things were unspeakable. And for me, all her writing was actually belying that and showing that no matter what it is, it can be spoken.
And the final question, Festival Director. You're working on a young adult speculative, a totally different terrain. How and why?
Okay.
And a happier terrain?
Right, all right. When my son went into adolescence, he's now in his early 20s, he stopped talking to me and he would grunt when I asked him things. So I spoke to a friend who had an older son and I said, did your son go through this grunting phase too? And she said, yes. So I said, what did you do? She said, I read the books that he read. So I went to see what my son was reading, and he was reading Rick Riordan, Percy Jackson. And so I thought, well, that's wonderful. I can now talk to him about Percy Jackson. But can't I give him something local, where the spiritual forces and the heroes are local? So that's how it was born.
So, Nervous Conditions struggled really to come to life because it took so long to get it published. This mournable body also did not have quite an easy ride at first, did it? Even at some point you were posting parts of it on Facebook. So I read, what's happening in this audience? So, your advice we have many writers, I'm sure, in the audience. I struggle sometimes myself, writers that are struggling to get it done, and it looks like it's never going to happen, and you're having a lot of rejections. Your advice to writers that are struggling with their projects, please.
Yeah, keep going. Doesn't matter what people say to you, doesn't matter what you say to yourself. If you're shouting too loud at yourself, just leave it for a little while until the voices calm down. But keep going and talk about it as much as you can. Some people don't feel comfortable talking too much, but as much as you can means you're opening yourself up to get help. So really the Facebook story is true. No one was interested in this mournable body until I started posting it on Facebook. Now, Ella Alfrey, yes, who is a publisher in England, who was originally Zimbabwean, saw it on Facebook, read the excerpts, and inboxed me and said, Tsitsi, when you are ready, please send me the manuscript and I will see what I can do. So that's what happened.
Thank you very much. Please read the headliner interview in this edition, in the Ake Review 2019 edition with Tsitsi Dangarembga. Get all the books, and while you can catch her here, get your autograph. Tsitsi Dangarembga, thank you so much. Thank you for opening up, and we wish you well when you go from here, and we hope to see you again, and we look forward to the next book. You are the inspiration. I really want you to know that. You are an inspiration, and you deserve to be celebrated everywhere you go.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, well, thank you for a wonderful interview. Thank you. It was just so wonderful talking to you. Thank you, everybody, for the love. I can just feel it.